So let's talk about MacArthur versus Truman. As we said before, MacArthur wanted to use full force against North Korea, and he actually wanted to send bombers into China to start loosening them up and telling them that we are in charge and they are not. The problem becomes, if you do that, what do you think is going to take place next? Well, China's going to retaliate, and there's a very good chance that eventually Russia will get involved. Truman was super careful about the use of the military for this reason. He felt like he did not want to utilize the military this way. He did not want to start World War III. And he didn't really feel like this was a great idea on MacArthur's part. MacArthur had continually claimed that there is no substitute for for victory. He did not want to give anything up. He wanted to go in there and defeat whoever was in his way, and he'd been able to do that for the most part in World War II and felt like that was going to carry on here. MacArthur openly criticized Truman for fighting a limited war, meaning he felt like we were almost fighting with one hand tied behind our back. We weren't using full force, we weren't using our full military capabilities, and as a result, we were going to not do so hot. Now, MacArthur understands the whole chain of command thing. He's been a military guy for a very, very long time. And as he openly criticizes Truman, particularly in the American newspapers, he knows that that's not going to go over too well. Truman is faced with a very tough decision. And amidst this tough decision, Truman decides that he's going to fire MacArthur for insubordination. Now, in the long run, MacArthur probably knew he shouldn't have done that, but he wanted to make sure that he did not get blamed for not going through and being as thorough as he could. There was a political headline here. MacArthur is fired. Truman ousts him from all jobs. Tokyo headquarters stunned by the news. Why would they be stunned? Well, because again, he was in charge of Japan, and it was a big deal. When it comes down to this, this was a huge deal. This was a World War II hero who gets fired for something that he's doing, of trying to kind of fight this war. And as a result of this, MacArthur was super popular when he came home. Huge parades, people looked up to him, wanted interviews with him, you name it. And Truman's unpopularity was on the rise because they felt like they didn't need to fire him. But again, MacArthur, being a chain of command guy, would know that if the guy that is below you is being an insubordinate, he would deserve to be fired. So perhaps, I know the newspaper said he didn't have any advance warning, but he does know the chain of command thing. So let's talk about the end of the war. The end of the war, actually the new president takes over in 1952, the election of 1952. President Dwight Eisenhower, who did have some military experience, takes over. And Richard Nixon is his vice president. They had two issues that they wanted to settle before the end of the war. POWs, pardon me, POWs, which stands for prisoner of war. And I'm not really sure why they always call them POWs, because it's not wars, it's POW, should just be POW there, I guess. But also the border. And what they decided was this: they were going to end the war, and this war began here on June 25th, 1950 at the 38th parallel, courtesy of the 1st Cavalry Division. The settlement line was the 38th parallel, and they settled on a prisoner exchange. Now, you guys, if you remember our previous video to this, where was Korea divided in the first place? Yep, you guessed it, the 38th parallel. So, no land was gained. No land was really lost. But, nonetheless, you have people that did die, and again, this is known as the Forgotten War because it is tucked in to the between the World War II and Vietnam. So that said, how many people did we submit into war when it came to the Korean War? What was our numbers? Well, as far as the casualties, there are roughly about 5 million people that were actually killed in there. But most of those individuals were from both North and South Korea. About 40,000 Americans actually died in action in Korea, with over 100,000 that were actually wounded in war. But the new president, Eisenhower, is going to come in and he's going to kind of finish this war up. And they settle at the 38th parallel and they decide on a prisoner exchange program. So this war takes place over a span of about 3 years. And again, unfortunately, there wasn't really a lot gained from this war itself. Let's talk about Eisenhower's term, Roman numeral 5. If you're following along in your books, this is basically where chapter 19 and 20 kind of split up here. So this is, I guess, technically chapter 20. Election of 1952, Adlai Stevenson runs for the Democratic Party. It's a picture of him there. Remember, the Democrats had ruled for about 20 years. They've ruled for about 20 years. That goes back to, obviously, Franklin Roosevelt being in charge and then Harry Truman taking over after that. And people are pretty much ready for a new change. And this is a picture of Dwight Eisenhower. Kind of looks like if it had an usher at an old Baptist church, and or maybe the old greeter at a Baptist church. But anyway, Dwight Eisenhower is chosen as president, and people are finally ready to move on from the Democrats, and they decide to choose him. Eisenhower mainly won because of his reputation as being a military leader and a very good foreign policy leader, and had a pretty good reputation with the American people, seen as a war hero. And Richard Nixon is chosen as his vice president. He made himself famous from the Alger Hiss communist case. The Cold War at home, we're actually going to have more McCarthyism. McCarthy isn't done with what he's doing. McCarthy claimed that the Army had communists in it and were running it. Now, he doesn't have great reason behind this. The argument that he kept going back to was that he felt that if we were truly going to win the war on communists, we would have been able to do it because we had an unbelievably good military. So his belief was that the reason we had not defeated the communists is because we simply had communists running our own military, and therefore they didn't want the Americans to win. They wanted the communists to win out. Now, remember Eisenhower's background. Eisenhower's background is closely tied to the military. You can imagine how infuriated this made him. Well, they actually ended up having hearings on TV, the Army McCarthy hearings, where he was accusing official after official after official with very little to no true evidence. And it was on TV, and it was on TV. You could watch it, and it was getting out of hand. It was getting out of control. And news came out that McCarthy was actually very, very corrupt. That the stuff that the evidence that he had found, he had lied about. The evidence that he had found were photos that he kind of doctored, or what that means is basically like he fixes them to make them look a certain way or incriminate somebody when they're not really being in trouble. And more news came out that through a lot of these accusations that he had against the American people, that there were people that he was lying about what he was saying about people, that he wasn't telling the truth. And more people are starting to realize that this guy's kind of a scumbag. And so what ends up happening is McCarthy's actually going to end up being censured by Congress. Now, censored basically means that you aren't completely kicked out of your office, but what ends up happening is you finish out your term as senator, and then during that time, you cannot vote on any piece of legislation. You cannot stand up and talk. You cannot have your viewpoint heard. You just have to sit there. So it's basically getting like the silent treatment without kicking you out, which you would think that they would just kick you out. That would be worse, but evidently this is worse, being censured, because it doesn't happen very often to too many people. This is a picture of him. This is McCarthy down here. These are the Army officials and these people that he's asking questions again, and them asking him a lot of questions about what's going on. And anyway, after he's censured by Congress, he eventually does lose his seat, and he actually passes away within 2 or 3 years of this censorship, but mainly because of some other health issues that he had. Some people believe that it was actually because he was living so many lies and falsely accusing people that perhaps hindered his health more than anything. More bombs. A hydrogen bomb was created by the United States. It was way more powerful than the atomic bomb. Now, if you remember the damage that the atomic bomb did, you can imagine that if there was one that's more powerful, then we would obviously want us to be able to make it and not someone else. And the big difference between the two itself was that we had access to this thing, and it just burned hotter. This is a picture of that cloud. The temperature was hotter itself. It created more of this red, like a huge heat wave almost, or think of it like that. And it would just do so much more damage itself than what the atomic bomb would do. The waves of destruction would be bigger. The grid of destruction, I guess, almost think of it like that, would be a lot worse. Well, obviously, as we are creating this, we know that our enemies in Russia are working on one as well. And Russia tested theirs in 1953. So at this point in time, they're not too far behind us when it comes to trying to create these atomic bombs, and then eventually these hydrogen bombs. And what that's going to do is it's going to create a lot of fear between the Americans and the Russians, as both groups are trying to learn how to test these bombs, with the threat that both countries would eventually probably use this when it comes down to it. It is said that this type of bomb was 150 times more powerful than the atomic bomb that was dropped, and basically saying you have to be, if you're around this thing, you will for sure die. And we will stop at number 3 with more fear, and we'll cover that. I do hope you guys have a great spring break, and don't forget to turn in your terms on time. And then once we get back from spring break, we'll have a lot more videos, and hopefully eventually we'll get back into school. But if we got to keep going this way, we'll keep doing it. But you guys are doing great. Thankful for you guys. I miss you, and hope things are going well. Enjoy your spring break.